Hey, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. So, in this video, we're going to go over elections in Canada. We're going to go over how we choose our governments. Now, you will note that I am a huge fan of memes. And I know lots of you are probably like 14, 13 years old. Look, guys, there's one thing that you need to know about elections, and that voting is a democratic responsibility. Because we have the right to participate in our government, it is important that you make sure that you actually vote. And I don't know if you're a big Walking Dead fan. I certainly am. So here we have Carl and his dad. I forget the name of him. Rick Grimes. And Rick's trying to impress upon how important it is to vote to Carl, because of the fact that if you don't vote, you can't complain, right? And guys, look, if you don't vote, like that, apathy, right? The term of being apathetic means to not care about something. To not care about democracy is crazy, because of the fact that, like, literally there's people living in like China, North Korea, Cuba, that wish they could vote, and they have a totalitarian governmental system, right? A dictatorship, and they have no right to actually vote in that system at all. Okay, let's move down. So let's talk, guys, about democracy. So democracy, I mean, we live in a democracy, but do you actually know what a democracy is? Do you actually know? So anyways, a democracy, guys, first of all, it goes back to the days of ancient Greece. Greece is considered to be the first democracy. Now, it wasn't a totally fair democracy, because only land-owning men of status could actually participate in politics. So if you're a slave, if you're a woman, if you're a man who was not a landowner, you didn't get to vote. But anyways, guys, as time has evolved, we understand democracy basically meaning that all people get to vote, okay? So the origin of the word democracy is broken down into two parts: demos and kratos, okay? And demos means citizens or people, and kratos means rule. So the word democracy means rule by the citizens. And we often juxtapose that with this idea of autocracy. Autocracy means rule by one. So if democracy is rule by many, a autocracy, also known as a dictatorship or a totalitarian government or an authoritarian government, all these things mean the same thing. They all mean rule by one. And you should know, guys, what happens when you have rule by one. When you have rule by one or a relative few, what happens? The system becomes corrupted. It's that whole idea that we looked at in the last video, where I talked about how we want power to be distributed amongst many, that Montesquieuian idea, where we make sure power is distributed to the many, not to the few or the singular, so that it doesn't corrupt them. Because as Lord Acton said, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So that's what we're getting at here. Okay, let's move down. Now let's talk about, guys, elections in Canada. Now, how we run our elections here in Canada is different than what you see in the United States of America. I realize that we watch a lot of American TV, we watch a lot of American news, right? We, of course, just had the American election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. So that kind of brings me to the first real difference between ourselves and the United States of America, guys. And that major difference between ourselves and the United States of America is the fact that in the United States of America, they actually vote for their president, right? Like on the first Tuesday of November, every fourth year, there is a presidential election. And that just happened, right? Actually, a month and a day ago when I'm recording this video. Yesterday was the 1 month anniversary of Joe Biden becoming the president-elect. Now, why are elections awesome? Guys, when people are in power for a long time, power, as we mentioned already, tends to corrupt people. So when you think of things like elections, I want you to think of it as like basically the refreshing of the political system, right? Over time, politicians get stinky, they get greasy, because all that greasy money thrown their way, they become corrupted, they become connected, right? I'm not saying all of them do, but there's the chance that it happens. So thankfully, guys, what an election is, it's like, have you ever gone outside on like a hot summer day and ever had to lay sod down, right? To me, that is one of the worst jobs, especially when it's hot out. So you're in the dirt, you're in the muck, right? You got grass and dirt all over you. It's hot out, right? And at the end of the day, you're just covered in dirt, right? Your arms, your face, you're stinky because it's hot out. And then at the end of the day, what do? You get into that shower and that water hits you, right? And then you get that bar soap and you just start soaping yourself up, and it's a beautiful thing, right? You get clean, you get refreshed. So guys, that's what an election is in our political system. An election is like taking a bar of Irish Spring or Dove soap and getting all the nooks and crannies clean, right? So guys, it basically kind of washes away the filth that we don't like, and it brings in sort of a new perspective, new people that aren't corrupted yet. So as it says right here, elections are a deep clean for the political system to help get rid of filth. And that, guys, is a quote from me, by the way. I sometimes quote myself, so there you go. Now, guys, kind of cool here in Canada. We talked about the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms before. According to our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, section number 4, no parliament shall sit for a duration of longer than 5 years. So the maximum amount of time either a provincial or a federal parliament can sit is 5 years. So what does that mean? You must have elections at least every 5 years. Typically, they actually happen more frequently than that. It's more like 4 years, unless it's a minority government. Then it is actually usually less than that as well, which we'll talk about that. But yeah, guys, just understand the whole point here for frequent and scheduled elections, right, or maximum durations of parliaments is, again, to prevent tyranny, to prevent corruption, to prevent the filth from getting stinkier. Now, let's talk about how elections work here in Canada. Now, when I think of elections, my friends, when I think of elections, I think of a Canadian election as basically 338 mini elections that happen to determine who is the government and who will be the prime minister, okay? So, guys, this map here that you have on the screen, right? This is the Canadian electoral map, and it shows the constituencies or the electoral districts or the ridings. Again, these all mean the same thing. You need to know the terminology, okay? So constituency, electoral district, and riding all mean the same thing. So there's 338 of them. So you can see, for instance, right, we have the Edmonton district right here. And if I count it right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 constituencies or ridings here in Canada. Now in Edmonton, guys. And what that means, guys, is there's 8 members of parliament who represent Edmonton in Ottawa. If you look at more populated cities like Toronto Metro, I mean, I could Google it really quickly. I'm not going to sit here and try to count all of these little constituencies here, but there's more. Why? Well, because the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, has, I'm going to say 4.5 or 6-ish million people. It's a lot, right? Edmonton, the Greater Edmonton area, is about 1 million people. So as a result, they have more representation in government. And guys, what this is the idea of representation by population. I'm just going to move down, then we'll talk about how we produce our government and our prime minister. So guys, in this chart here, right, and remember, when you're going through this, you should actually read this, because I'm not going over every single thing, right? You have eyes, you have a brain, you can read, so make sure you do. Now, guys, look at the population of, let's say, Ontario. Ontario has 13.4 million people as of the time that this chart was produced, and as a result, Ontario has 121 seats in the House of Commons. That's 121 out of 338. So Ontario, if we scroll back up, right, this is Ontario over here, right? Ontario, plus, of course, the Toronto metro area, which is broken down, and different areas like Niagara, London, Essex, etc. Ontario has 121 seats in the House of Commons. Now, why is that? Why do they have so many? Well, look how big their population is. Their population is about 40% of the total Canadian population at that time, which was almost 35 million people. Alberta, right, alternatively, has 3.8 million people in this chart, and we have 34 seats. So look, here's the bottom line, guys. The more population you have in your province, the more seats your province will have in the House of Commons. That is representation by population. Places which are less populated have less seats in the House of Commons. For instance, let's look at Nunavut, right? There's 33,322 people, they get 1 seat, right? 43,000 people in the Northwest Territories, 1 seat. There's about 4 times as many people in PEI than there is in Nunavut, right? If you do the math, they have 4 times the number of seats. So it's basically a mathematical ratio which determines how many people a province has in the House of Commons. And on average, each seat in Parliament, right, each constituency seat represents about 102,020 people if you do the math. So all I did there is I took 34,482,779 divided by 338, and I got this number. Okay, and I think I rounded because you can't have like a half person or a third of a person. Okay, now, guys, let's talk about how we determine the Prime Minister of Canada. Now, guys, I mentioned before that a Canadian election is like 338 mini elections, and we'll talk about this when we look at our electoral system called first past the post in more detail here. So guys, to become the Prime Minister, does anyone know how you become the Prime Minister? I'm not hearing anyone. So anyways, look, to become the Prime Minister, what happens, guys, is you have to be the leader of the party which gets the most seats in a federal election. So whichever party leader gets the most seats in an election, right, and one just happened in 2019, and it happened to be the Liberal Party of Canada, they got more seats, right, more people chose a Liberal candidate in each one of these constituencies than any other party, right? NDP, Green, Conservative, etc. And as a result, we have a, quote, liberal government, right? So whichever party gets the most seats becomes the government, and the leader of that party becomes the Prime Minister, right? Kind of a simple idea, but we'll get into the reality of it in the next video. All right, now, guys, so the path to victory is pretty simple. To become the government, all you need to do is win the most constituencies, ridings, or electoral districts, right? And of course, again, the Prime Minister is the leader of the party that gets the most seats. Simple. Now, there are times, guys, where there's basically 2 outcomes of a Canadian federal election, and that is either a minority government or a majority government. Let's talk about what each one of these is and why in every election parties are hoping to form majority government. So first of all, guys, minority government, what is it? So I mentioned, guys, and this is based on that 338 seat idea, right? So there's 338 seats in the House of Commons representing 338 constituencies across the map of Canada. To become or to be declared a minority government, you have to have 50% of the seats or less. Whichever party wins the election, right, they get the most seats compared to anyone else. If you get less than, or 50% or less, sorry, not less than, but 50% or less than 338 seats, you form a minority government. So the magic number, guys, is 169. If any party gets 169 seats in the election or less, and is declared the winner, they form a minority government. And I'm going to tell you this right now, guys. Governments try to avoid this like cold sores. You know what I mean? Like the way you don't want to kiss someone who has cold sores on their lips, you also don't want to be a minority government. Now, why is that? Well, guys, it's very simple. Minority governments are prone to toppling. They generally don't last long, and let's explain why. So guys, there's votes in the House of Commons called confidence votes. And if you're a minority government, right? Remember guys, in a democracy, this whole idea of the will of the people is incredibly important, right? And if it's found that you're not representing the will of the people by having the representatives in government, right, the members of parliament not support you, then the end result always has to be an election. It always has to be. Remember, democracy is supposed to be by the people, of the people, for the people. And if it is found that the people and the representatives who've been elected to represent them aren't supporting your government, then you must form another government, right? It's that simple. Now, why don't governments like elections? Well, there's always a chance, guys, that in an election, because of a non-confidence vote or because of a budget bill that doesn't pass, that's generally the two ways in which we have elections before their time here in Canada with a minority government, is a confidence vote happens and they don't pass that, right? There's a vote of no confidence in the House of Commons where they don't have that bill or that law passed, that confidence vote pass, or budget bills. If budget bills don't pass, also it's believed that the government has lost the faith of the people. And what do we have to have again? When that happens, we have to have an election, okay? So with that being said, guys, every party wants to get a majority government, okay? A majority government. Now, I like to think of, guys, a government toppling as kind of like, hey, what's up, Mr. Trudeau? I like to think of a minority government toppling as pulling the wrong piece when you play Jenga, right? And it goes crashing. What do we have to do? We have to have an election. Okay, so guys, instead of a minority government, every government, when there's an election, wants to get, or every party wants to get, a majority government. And as it says, I mean, you know, Prime Minister Trudeau loves you, but there's only one thing he loves more than you, and that is, and crying on camera, he loves that too. But anyways, there's nothing wrong with crying. He's a very emotional man. But even more sweet than spending time with you and getting a lot of airtime to be able to talk is a majority government. Okay, now, how do you get a majority government, guys? A majority government's pretty simple. You get more than 169 seats. Well, what's more than 169? Well, 170 is, or more, right? So to get a majority government, guys, you have to get 50% plus 1. 50% of 338 is 169 plus 1 equals 170. So in every single Canadian federal election, the party that wins wants to get 170 seats or more. Now, with that being said, right, key understanding here, majority government, good in the eyes of government. Now, in the 2015 Canadian election, let's look at some election stats, okay? So this is the 2015 Canadian election. Down here, we have the 2019 federal election. So let's look at this, guys. Couple of things. Number one, right, the Liberals got 184 seats. Conservatives got 99. The NDP, 44. Bloc Québécois, 10. And the Green Party, 1. One lowly seat. So anyways, guys, who won the election? Well, who got the most seats? The Liberals did. So in 2015, we formed a Liberal government. Now, was it a majority or a minority? Again, what's that magic number? 170 for majority. Did they get more than 170? Yes, they did. And as a result, we had a Liberal majority government. Okay? It's that simple. Now, another thing we need to talk about here, guys, is something called the official opposition. In our Westminster system of parliament, we have a second party in the House of Commons known as the official opposition, and they become that by getting the second most seats in the House of Commons. What is the job of the official opposition? Their job, ladies and gentlemen, is to basically be a shadow cabinet and to watch over what happens or what the Liberal government is doing as far as policy, etc. They also, guys, create shadow ministers who, You know, I mentioned before that the government creates what are called cabinet positions, right? Cabinet ministers are people who run important departments in the federal government, like Health Canada, like National Defense, like the Department of Indigenous Affairs or Aboriginal Affairs. And guys, with that being said, the official opposition shadow cabinet, they also appoint people to basically watch those cabinet ministers and to scrutinize what they're doing. Why do we have a party whose job it is to basically scrutinize everything that the government does? Well, the whole point here, guys, is to make sure that what the government is doing is in the best interest of the people, right? They don't just rule carte blanche and do whatever they want. This is so that there's accountability in government. And these other parties can do it as well. They just don't have as much voice because they're not the official opposition. Okay, now, with that being said, again, 2015, Liberal majority government, and the Conservatives were the official opposition. Now, let's look at 2019. The 2019 federal election, the most recent one that we had, 4 years after the 2015 election. So notice, first of all, guys, the Liberal government lasted 4 years, and that's very typical of a majority government, right? Elections in Canada are generally scheduled now, right? I said they can last up to 5 years. In general, they're scheduled for every 4 years at maximum, okay? Now, looking at the 2019 stats, what do we see here? We see the Liberals 157, Conservatives 121, Bloc Québécois 32, New Democrats 24, Green Party 3, and we had one independent. An independent, guys, is someone who doesn't have representation under one of the major political parties. So anyways, we had a Liberal government in 2019, right? So right now in Canada, we're living under a Liberal government. But what do you notice here? 157. What did I say is the magical number again? That's right, 170. So they didn't get 170 seats. So it was a minority government. And again, that is the fear of every single government. When there's an election, they want to get that magical 170. Now, Liberal government, right? Conservative opposition, okay? And like, it was pretty close, right? And actually, when we look at the popular vote, you'll see, in fact, that the Conservatives got more, which is kind of crazy. So anyways, let's talk pros and cons of majority and minority governments. Let's talk minority governments first, okay? Because it's on the chart here. Guys, minority governments, what are the pros? The big pro of a minority government, I'm not going to read all of this to you, but the big pro, guys, of a minority government is the fact that it forces compromise in the House of Commons, right? Again, remember, guys, confidence votes, when they happen, budget bills, when they happen, you want to make sure that at least half the people plus one in the House of Commons are supporting you. It needs to be an absolute majority. So as a result, guys, if you want to build a pass in the House of Commons and you don't have enough people because you're a minority government to support that bill, right? You're not getting 50% plus one. You're going to have to go to the other parties, like the Conservatives, like the Green Party, like the Bloc Québécois, like the NDP. And you're going to have to try to sweeten them up, which usually means including things that they want in the bill in order to have them vote for it and support it. Because again, if they don't support it, what happens? Government can topple and we have to have another election. So speaking of elections, that's actually one of the big cons of a minority government. Guys, when you have minority government situations, it typically produces more frequent elections. Now, I don't know about you, but I love election season. I love seeing signs scattered down Clover Bar Road here in Sherwood Park, where it's just like sign, 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 sign. Everywhere you can see, there's an election sign. So anyways, guys, look, it produces more frequent elections. Legislation is not passed as efficiently, so this can be sort of a detriment to the legislative process, because again, rather than having parties with majorities just support the bill and then it getting passed quickly, you now have to go into the House of Commons and wine and dine and compromise and deliberate and discuss, and it's a slower process, which I'm not saying is necessarily bad, but sometimes bills need to get passed in the interest of the people, and this slows it down. Also, guys, there's the case of Italy, which is a proportional representative system, and we'll talk about that in the next video. In Italy, where they use proportional rep, and many European democracies do, they've had something like, I'm going to say, 6 elections in the last 10 years. That's kind of crazy, right? It's just constant government topple, government topple, government topple, government topple. It's crazy, right? So that's kind of annoying, right? I don't know about you, but again, I'm not really a big fan of elections. So that's minority governments. It's good that it forces compromise, but it's bad that it slows down legislation, and it also forces more frequent elections. Now, let's talk majority government, right? This side of the chart. So majority governments, guys, what are the pros of them? Legislation's passed efficiently. And also, we have less frequent elections due to this thing called party discipline. What the heck is party discipline, Mr. Crosby? I'm glad you asked. Party discipline is this convention in government that says, you know, if your leader says we're having a vote in the House of Commons and we're going to support this bill, then you support it. Why? Well, a couple of reasons. And the main reason is because you don't want to get dismissed by your party. Okay? If you don't support the bill in government, it is very likely that you will be shunned from the party and dismissed, right? And you don't want that because now you're no longer a member of that political party. There's also an individual who's called the party whip, who, when there's an election, right, it's an actual position in government, they're going to come around and make sure they have your word, and your word's important, right? They're going to make sure they have your word that you are supporting this bill. So you're going to get pressure from the party whip, and also there's the pressure of, if you don't support the bill, you're going to get released by the party. You don't want that, because you want to be a member of a party so that you have the support of your party and the protection of it. So anyways, guys, less frequent elections, right? Yay, which is maybe good, right? Because again, not really a big fan of frequent elections. Elections are good, but do we need them every year or two? Probably not. Just so you guys are aware, the typical duration of a minority government is about 18 months here in Canada. Okay, so anyways, and also, guys, legislation is passed more efficiently. So that's good. Now, cons. Well, look at, guys, the cons of the majority government situation are the pros of a minority government. The con, guys, of a majority government is you don't have to have compromise in the House of Commons between parties in order to get legislation passed because of party discipline. Because of that convention that says you will support the party or you're going to be removed. Okay? And sometimes, guys, legislation can be pushed through that perhaps isn't in the best interest of all Canadians. Okay, so that's our lesson, guys, on elections here in Canada. In the next video, we're going to look at our electoral system called First Past the Post in a whole bunch of detail. And I'm going to try to convince you that perhaps we should change. Maybe not, but maybe so. So we'll look at the pros and cons of First Past the Post. All right, stay smart and keep learning, guys. Take it easy.